Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
we're grinding our way with progress.
as shootings remain high and officer morale plummets, Chicago police detailed their holiday weekend violence prevention strategy.
Everything would have a Donald signature on it or his initial.
The Trump Organization and its CFO, Alan Weisselberg, face a multitude of charges in an alleged scheme to dodge 15 years of taxes.
It is a rose that's growing from concrete.
Two new developments are bringing jobs and affordable homes to the North Lawndale community on Chicago's west side.
The cases for and against Washington, D.C. becoming the nation's 51st state and the odds of Congress making that happen.
Jeffrey Bayer has the story of Chicago's old rail stations in tonight's Ask Jeffrey.
You could not do this if you didn't have what we have here.
And the secret behind some of the most celebrated honey in Illinois.
And as you mentioned, I'm in North Lawndale for this week's Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. This week, the area welcomed two new projects, one bringing affordable homes, the other bringing jobs. We'll talk with community leaders about how they hope that this will help to strengthen the community and also help residents to build wealth. But first, back to you.
Thank you, Amanda. And now to some of today's top stories. Another alderperson is indicted, and this time, so is her chief of staff. The U.S. Attorney's Office announces the indictment of 34th Ward alderperson Carrie Austin on bribery charges. Austin is accused of getting personal benefits like free home improvements and furniture from a contractor that she helped direct city tax revenue to build residential developments in her ward. Indictments also allege Austin's chief of staff, Chester Wilson, got personal benefits from the contractor as well. Arraignments have not yet been scheduled. Halfway through 2021, and Chicago is on pace for one of its deadliest years of gun violence since the 1990s. That said, homicides are starting to retreat a bit this year over last year. There have been 332 total homicides through the end of June, according to the Chicago Police Department. That's just below the 338 homicides recorded to this point last year. That was one of the deadliest years in recent memory. The number of shootings outpaces last year, however, by 12%. And this data comes as Chicago alderpeople call for a special city council meeting on violence. Meanwhile, Police Superintendent David Brown and top brass talked about their summer strategy of saturating 15 high-crime neighborhoods with more resources.
If you looked at a heat map of, let's say, all the violent crime in the city versus a heat map of all of our activity, and you were to overlay them, we believe the more closely we can get those two maps to mirror each other, the greater reduction we can, the greater chance we have of reducing violent crime.
And we'll have more on this story in just a few moments. Chicago's minimum wage for large businesses with more than 20 employees is officially $15 per hour. Mayor Lori Lightfoot today touted the new wage, coming after she signed an ordinance in 2020 to hike it starting July 1st. The minimum hourly wage for workers at companies with 4 to 20 employees will rise 50 cents per hour, capping off at $14 an hour starting 2 years from today. The state's $10 minimum wage is set to rise by $1 next year, and the federal minimum wage is still at $7.25 an hour. And now to Brandis, and more on today's report on crime levels in the city. Brandis.
Paris, as you mentioned earlier, shootings in Chicago are up almost 12% this year, with homicides about flat compared to this point in 2020. But Chicago police are touting numbers they say show their summer violence strategy is having an impact. WTTW News reporter Matt Masterson joins us now with more context. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Brandis.
So, as we mentioned, shootings overall are up this year, but down year over year for May and June. Here's what Police Superintendent David Brown said today about this.
For June 2021, Chicago experienced 78 murders, which is a 20% decrease compared with June 2020's 98 murders.
So, Matt, what is the story here? Are Chicago police actually making progress in reducing shootings and homicides?
So it's a little difficult to say exactly. Like you said, homicides are slightly below last year's pace at this point through the first half of the year. But 2020 was also one of the most violent years that Chicago had seen in the last couple of decades. So even slight progress in the amount of homicides and shootings, or at least homicides, is putting Chicago on pace for one of the deadliest years since 2000. So the city is hopeful. There were fewer homicides in May and June, as Superintendent Brown pointed out. Despite those 6-month figures that show the city's basically on par with last year, the trend from the last couple months, officials are hoping is putting the city back on track to go in a better direction.
Now, of course, we're heading into the 4th of July weekend. What is the department's strategy, and is it any different from previous years?
So this year, Chicago officials are relying on what they've called a data-driven approach to flood historically violent districts in the city with more resources beyond just the Chicago Police Department. This is not the first time that the city has relied on like an all-hands-on-deck approach, as they call it, to summer violence. But at this point, David Brown isn't anxious to make any changes. He pointed over the Memorial Day weekend to what he said was a 10-year low in the amount of violence during that holiday weekend. And he said if this means that violence is going to continue going down using this strategy, that isn't necessarily the newest, that he wants to keep riding the strategy until the wheels fall off, he said, if it means more holidays with historically low violence.
Now, there's been a lot of criticism, especially from the police union, surrounding Chicago police working those 12-hour shifts, their days off being canceled over the past year. Here is what Superintendent Brown said about that today.
We are sworn to protect the people of Chicago. But we have also acknowledged 12-hour shifts and canceled days off are impacting our officers. We've acknowledged that. And we have implemented a officer wellness plan as a part of this deployment.
Matt, how big of a problem is police morale right now?
Well, officers have been working without a new police contract for the last 4 years now, and union reps have said that there's more retirements and less recruits coming into the department this year. So it does appear that morale is a problem. And those same union officials have said that this 12-hour shift and canceled days off during these holiday weekends is a direct cause of some of those problems and a reason for why morale does appear to be going in the wrong direction this year.
And we know that aldermen have called Superintendent Brown to appear before City Council, a special meeting of the council tomorrow. He says he will be there. What do we expect to happen?
So the aldermen want to speak about what the department is doing exactly in terms of violence prevention, especially after a wave of mass shootings across the city throughout the last month. So as you said, Brown said today that he does plan to attend, but he didn't give a direct answer when asked today if he plans to answer all the questions from city council members. So at this point, it's not exactly clear if we're going to get more insight on what the department is planning for this weekend or for the rest of the summer in terms of violence prevention.
Okay, some potential fireworks at City Council tomorrow before the 4th of July. Matt Masterson, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Brandon.
And you can read Matt's full story on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. Several new projects could bring people back to the West Side. Black Chicagoans flocked to the city's North Lawndale community after World War II. But in recent decades, the population has dwindled. For the latest in our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series, Amanda Vinicki and producer Marissa Nelson spent the day in North Lawndale. Amanda joins us from there now. Hey, Amanda.
Hey, Brandis. I'm in North Lawndale's Douglas Park. Actually, it was officially renamed last year in honor of abolitionist Frederick Douglass rather than Stephen Douglas. Douglas Park hosts a lot of Chicago's big events and concerts. Last year, after having been canceled because of COVID, Riot Fest is going to be back in September here. So among the other attractions, Martin Luther King Jr. Exhibit Center. MLK lived here for a time in the 60s. Home Square Community Center, a 14-story, still standing structure that was actually Chicago's original Sears Tower. These are all attractions that fashion designer Danita Robinson says makes North Lawndale one of Chicago's hidden gems.
I think it is a rose that's growing from concrete. I think it has so much beauty that's hidden behind so much darkness, but it's now blossoming. A lot of the seeds that's been planted are now starting to flourish.
A rose, she says, because it is a community that is full of love, a community full of support with active community groups like the Homeowners Association, of which she is a member. Now, as for the concrete, there is the violence, a lack of investment, systemic discrimination.
When we talk about barriers and things that this community doesn't have access to, redlining being one, no access to homeownership, legitimate access to capital to get the homeownership. You know, I can have the same credit score as someone from Lincoln Park, and we don't get the same access to capital. I think that's concrete.
Robinson grew up in North Lawndale, and a couple years ago, she bought a home near 13th and Central Park that's close to her grandma, within walking distance from her grade and high schools. Also across the street from a dog park, which she says her Yorkie and Shih Tzu, Prince and Sparkle, really appreciate. She says that it is time to be the change that her community needs to see, and that means investing in it. She says owning a home here gives her power. North Lawndale does offer some gorgeous old graystones, but there are also a lot of vacant lots, more than 2,000. A joint city-state community partnership aims to begin to bring life to some of those empty spaces. The city selling 250 parcels for $1 each. Then the Lawndale Christian Development Corporation will lead a project to build subsidized homes on them. Director Richard Townsell hopes that they'll sell for about $200,000 each, within reach for working families.
And so our goal is, how do we get people to not move but improve? How do we repopulate, get young people like Danita Robinson and others to decide not to go live in the West Loop, but instead, buy a home in North Lawndale. Get people that have historic ties through churches that work at Sinai Hospital or the medical center at Rush, and schools to decide that they want to buy and live in North Lawndale.
Also involved in the project, Shangwei Parker, who does property management for affordable housing and lives in one of those graystones. He says North Lawndale is a mere 7 minutes from downtown, also near 290 and CTA stops. But he says North Lawndale just hasn't seen the development recently that other areas of the city have. His goal with this project, to not make it just about home ownership, but also job training, to give young people the skills they need in the construction trades to make these homes.
It's always been my vision to see people build the homes, and in the process of building homes, they make meaningful wages that they can purchase the homes. And I just think it would be such a great story if we actually had a community that can walk down the street with their sons and daughters to say, hey, I built that home, I built that home, and by the way, I built the home that we stay in.
We spoke with Parker down the street from Harmony Community Church. The congregation, by the way, used the time that it had to be empty during the pandemic to do some renovating, but is now back to hosting Sunday 10 a.m. services. And the pastor assures me that the music is really great. Pastor James Brooks grew up in North Lawndale, but his family was among those that left, and really that exodus. According to the latest American Community Survey, the population of North Lawndale, which is 87% black, now hovers near 34,000. That is down from well over 100,000 at its peak. But Brooks came back and is now raising his daughters here. Violence is a challenge, but it is one, he says, that the church confronts head on with its Project Presence peace gatherings.
Wherever there's a hot spot, wherever violence has occurred, wherever drug sales are high, we work in collaboration with our police department and other organizations within the community, and we set up positive loitering events. And this allows us to bring positivity to a negative spot.
Now, the new homes are not the only project that North Lawndale is seeing. On Monday, the governor, also former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel, were on hand for a ribbon cutting at the Will Group's new manufacturing warehouse at K Street project, a 60,000 square foot space. But this is just phase one. The plan is to double it within the next year and a half or so. President Josh Davis says the Will Group looked at other and less expensive areas for its expansion, but decided to do it in North Lawndale.
Because we wanted to invest in the west side. We've been on the west side since 2008, and long term for us, we had developed the workforce that lived in the surrounding area, and so for us, we wanted to stay in the community, and we're really proud of our ability to do that.
The Will Group makes street lighting, also other electrical equipment, including a lot of those new LED street lights that you see around the city. Davis says the goal is to hire at least 100 local people to work at this new plant. It is a job, by the way, that offers a 401k, health benefits, tuition reimbursement, and what he says are competitive wages. Assembly jobs starting at between $16 and $20 an hour. Jarvis Reed is one of the 26 employees and local residents working at the facility now.
I work different little tip agency jobs, but this is like the first job out of all the other jobs that I actually have now that I could feel that's like it's better than the other jobs that I had.
We caught up with another worker who says that he was really proud when he drove by a nearby Amazon distribution center and was able to tell his 10-year-old son, Carl, that he had made the specialized lighting and other electrical equipment that powers it. Now, there is more economic activity ahead for North Lawndale. Alderperson Michael Scott says that an RFP is out to redevelop the Operation Silver Shovel dump site, and we did talk with Alderman Scott about that and more. We'll have that coming up, but for now, back to you in the studio.
Should be interesting. Looking forward to it, Amanda. Thank you. And now, Paris, we go back to you.
Silver Shovel brings up a lot of memories of news stories of yore. Brandis, yet another aldermanic indictment in Chicago. This is prosecutors in New York have charged the Trump Organization and its chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, with tax fraud in a deliberate 15-year scheme to compensate company executives off the books. Both pleaded not guilty. Weisselberg is accused of dodging taxes on benefits valued at more than $1.7 million. And here to talk about the charges and what could come next in the ongoing investigations are Michael Monaco, a former federal prosecutor now known for his work as a criminal defense attorney as a partner at Monaco and Spivak, and Renato Mariotti, a former assistant U.S. attorney and a partner at Thompson Coburn LLP. Welcome back. Good to see both of you. First, Renato, before we get to the Trump news, almost 3 months here without an aldermanic indictment, but that drought ends today. What do you make of the charges against Alderwoman Carrie Austin that she and her chief of staff allegedly got benefits from a contractor whom she helped steer city money to?
I think she has to be very concerned. The current group over there doing public corruption work has been very aggressive, obviously, in a number of fronts. But it definitely looks like they have a significant case. And this is something, of course, we've known about and been anticipating for quite some time.
And it has been in the news, including a raid on her office. All right, let's turn to what happened in New York today. Mike Monaco, we mentioned the charges against the Trump Organization and CFO Alan Weisselberg. How serious do you believe these charges are?
Well, I think they are serious. They carry prison terms, although each of the 15 counts is probationable. What's interesting is it seems as though the state prosecutors in New York and the city prosecutors are going after Alan Weisselberg in a way that is intended to get him to cooperate against someone else. It's unclear whether he's going to do that. I say that because I know Mr. Cohen has testified many times about this matter. And
Michael Cohen, you're talking about the president's former president's former fixer.
Right, who's my client. And I can't go into exactly what he said, but I know it goes way beyond what's in this indictment.
So, Renato Mariotti, as you look at this, do you look at this as the end game here from the New York Attorney General's office and the New York Manhattan District Attorney's office, or the tip of the iceberg?
Well, we don't know for sure yet, but one thing I think is evident to me from looking at this is they have a substantial case. I think is likely to obtain a conviction if what's alleged in the indictment is in fact true. And what I will say is that it seems to me that they don't have the evidence right now to charge others or charge a more extensive scheme or conspiracy. If they did, I don't think they would be just dropping this more narrow, more focused charge on Weisselberg now. As Michael said, I think likely to try to get Mr. Weisselberg to flip.
So, and Mike, you alluded to that. I mean, the only person above Weisselberg is Donald Trump himself or perhaps his sons who allegedly were running the company. Do you look at this as sort of a classic attempt from the Justice Department to squeeze him to get more information to flip? And do you think he will flip?
Well, it seems that that is what they're attempting to do. It's hard to say what he's going to do since, as I say, each of the counts is probationable. It's not as when my client got 30 months in jail for deceiving the taxes on and paying hush money to the prostitutes. So
Stormy Daniels you're talking about?
Right. So I don't know exactly what our Alan Weisselberg is going to do. It seems that he's facing a very difficult choice. But as I say, since he may not be facing jail, I'm not sure. And that's something we'll have to see.
As you said, these charges could be probational, each of these charges. Renato Mariotti, the defense from Mr. Weisselberg so far, his attorneys, he's an accountant. He didn't know any of this was a foul of the law. And then the public relations strategy from the Trump attorneys is to call it a political witch hunt. Are either these effective or believable defenses?
Well, I thought the Trump Organization statement was odd because it didn't even deny the charges, which Michael and I, when we represent clients, usually that's the first thing you say if you're representing a client who's been charged. So I thought that was unusual that they didn't even deny the facts of the charges. What I will say is to Weisselberg, the difficulty he's going to have, if you read the indictment, is essentially it was a very straightforward scheme where basically they lowered his pay that was on the books and then gave him a commensurate off the books pay that they didn't pay taxes on or claim a deduction on. So he was actually the guy writing the checks. So he was writing the checks for his own rent on his own apartment from the Trump Organization. And obviously it's going to, I think it's be hard for jurors to get their heads around an argument that he didn't know that he was receiving that benefit. Same with the cars he was getting or tuition for his kids. It's just a substantial amount of money, and he was in the thick of it.
Pretty easy case for jurors, perhaps, to follow. Mike Monaco, you mentioned Trump's former fixer, Michael Cohen. He and Alan Weisselberg were behind that hush money payment to the porn star Stormy Daniels, which was the beginning of this whole investigation. Cohen went to prison for that. Weisselberg and Trump have not been charged. Here's some of what Cohen had to say today.
I won't discuss my conversations with the district attorney out of respect for the investigation. All I can say is, yes, there are a multitude of documents that are in the possession of prosecutors that tie Donald Trump to everything. The target of this investigation is not Alan Weisselberg. Of course, it's the CEO of the Trump Organization, Donald Trump himself.
Mike Monaco, you mentioned that you had represented Mr. Cohen in that Stormy Daniels case. You talked to him today. Did he say any more to you about what he thinks of these charges and what might be coming?
He too is a bit surprised that it wasn't a bigger case.
What does he make of that, or what do you read into that?
The way I make of it is that that the prosecutor Cy Vance and the New York Attorney General are being very careful, and they're taking their steps one at a time, and they're doing it in a way that they feel is best. They've got an excellent prosecutor they brought in Mark Pomerantz, who's also doing a great job, and it's going to be a long haul. We'll see what's going to happen. I think this is definitely not the end of the investigation.
Certainly, charging an organization tied to a former president carries with it is fraught with issues. Renato Mariotti, what does this do to the Trump Organization, to Trump's sons, to their ability to conduct business, to their ability to get loans or to pay back their loans?
Yeah, I think that's significant. Regardless of whether there's a conviction at the end of the day here, I will tell you from representing companies that have been under investigation or indictment that it really puts a constraint on the company. You know, employees start thinking about whether they want to find a new job. Anybody who's doing business with you suddenly reconsiders whether they really want to do that. When you try to get a loan or a line of credit, you have to disclose the charges to the creditor, and sometimes the lender doesn't want to get involved or loan you that money anymore. When you're trying to sell assets or have a merger or any sort of a business combination, that can be another difficult disclosure. I just think it can definitely hamstring a business and have serious consequences. So anyone suggesting this is a good day for the Trump Organization is not being serious.
And that organization has already had trouble attracting a lot of lenders and banks to do business with it. Well, both of these cases, Austin and the Trump Organization, we'll talk more about tomorrow on the Weekend Review. But for now, our thanks to Michael Monaco and Renato Mariotti. And up next, selling vacant lots to community organizations in North Lawndale. So stay with us.
Is there anything that these police departments can do to earn trust from the community at this point? What inspired you to propose this bill?
Need some legislation. We've got to turn the page on this history.
What are the ways in which we can hold institutions accountable while also providing an opportunity for community to show up and not only just demand but ask that we build these bridges together, because I think that that's the only way that we're truly going to get free.
And now we check back in with Amanda Vinicky, who spent the day reporting in North Lawndale as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Amanda.
Yes, Paris. Earlier today, I spoke with 24th Ward Alderman Michael Scott Jr. His office, by the way, on Keeler, which is one of the streets that gives part of North Lawndale that K-Town nickname. Now, I began by asking him about the city's announcement on Monday that it is going to sell 250 vacant lots to community organizations to develop and put homes on.
Well, you know, as the mayor talked about, we have a gluttony of vacant lots here in the 24th Ward, somewhere in the amount of 2,500 over the course of the entire ward. And so, although 250 is a small number compared to 2,500, to bring back 250 families to this community, I think would be huge. We're underpopulated. We're looking for rooftops. Rooftops bring economic development. Economic development brings jobs. Jobs bring a better public safety. And so I think that's all cyclical, and it'll help our community greatly.
Yeah, we're across the street from one of these vacant lots now, and it's pretty right now.
It is.
Wildflowers blooming, but typically, what does that mean for our community?
Typically, a vacant lot means, you know, you have to have streets and sand come out there and cut. You have to have streets and sand come out there and clean. You have to have community residents come and pick up behind you. And so it is usually an eyesore. You have those pretty blue flowers, but those are really weeds. It catches all the debris in the bags and stuff like that. And so to have a house there, to have a residence there, to have somebody building community there, I think is again, really important for North Lawndale.
Now, I believe that this was at the announcement for another project here, and this is the K-Town Business Center. You spoke about your late father having, you asked him once, Dad, why are we staying here?
Exactly.
Can you tell us that story, please?
So when I was in 7th or 8th grade, my father was actually, he was at, what was that, special events. He was at special events at the time, and he was the director. And he had come home early from work. And it was around the Taste of Chicago time. And, you know, if you're working at special events at that time, Taste of Chicago is the biggest event in the city of Chicago. You're there every day. You're there until midnight.
Really late.
And so he happened to be there early, and I got there and found out somebody had broken into our home, take all my bikes and that stuff. And it was right at the end of school, so it was around summertime. And so I'm really anxious because I don't have anything to do for the summer. He told me, hey, don't worry about it. We'll get it back. Those are material items. And as we were coming out of our basement, the guys who my father had seen earlier were back. He chased him across the street. Long story short, he got shot right across the street from my house. And when that happened, I said, hey, Dad, you know, why are we here in this community? We got so many people who are you know, stealing from us, you know, committing bodily harm. You know, what's the point of us being here? And my father said to me, hey, you know, a couple things. If you leave here, you rob this community of all of the things that it has poured into you. And then lastly, if we leave, you're part of the problem and not part of the solution. And so that's kind of why I serve and why I'm here in this community and why I continue to do the work that I do.
And you are a legacy of West Side politics. We're seeing a whole lot of change. The mayor losing control, it appears, of CPS. I mean, what is your perspective? We only have about 30 seconds of how different politics is from when you were growing up.
Oh my goodness, it is vastly different. and change hurts, but it's always necessary. And so hopefully this is a change for the better, and we'll have a positive outcome on the city of Chicago.
And I'm going to try and fit in one more question. You are one of the aldermen who did call for this special meeting that will be held tomorrow. What is your reasoning behind that? What have you not learned otherwise about Chicago crime, violence prevention that you hope to glean from the superintendent in this special meeting?
So for this, I think it's more about my residents. 50% of the calls that I get for service in this community is about public safety. And so, for me to be able to explain to my community kind of what's going on is one thing. For the CEO or the superintendent of the police district to be able to come to the community and say, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to help your community feel safer. This is what we're going to do. I think it's very important, and that's what my community is asking for, and that's why I signed on.
By the way, as we were finishing our interview with the alderman, a couple of his constituents did drive by, wave, beep. One said that he's great, super responsive. So that's what I think every alderperson wants to hear. Coming up, we are going to talk about the launch of a new recreation association. That's happening this weekend. More coming up. But for now, back to you in the studio.
All right, Amanda, we'll look forward to that. And still to come on Chicago tonight, would the attack on our nation's capital have unfolded differently if Washington, D.C. was a state? We hear from two sides of the D.C. statehood debate. How a social service agency is supporting youth and families in the North Lawndale community, and the launch of a new recreation association on the west side. Jeffrey Bayer has the fascinating story of Chicago's old commuter railroad stations in tonight's edition of Ask Jeffrey. And Illinois is known for growing corn and soybeans, but it also has a buzzing honey industry. We share the secret behind some of the most celebrated kind in the state.
This is starting.
But first, some more of today's top stories. Chicago's airports are bracing for what could be the busiest travel weekend since the start of the pandemic. O'Hare and Midway are planning to host around 1 million passengers this weekend. That's up 240% over the same period last year. City aviation officials predict Friday will be the busiest day of the travel year, with more than 220,000 passengers expected to pass through O'Hare and then 41,000 at Midway. Mayor Lori Lightfoot took a page from former President Donald Trump and branded a belittling nickname on a political rival. The mayor, speaking at a press conference this afternoon, referred to indicted 14th Ward alderperson Ed Burke as Burger King Ed. That Burger King part refers to one of the criminal charges Burke faces involving the fast food franchise in his ward. And this was all in response to tomorrow's emergency city council meeting to discuss city violence. Lightfoot says she believes Burke is the ringleader behind the whole thing.
Is still alive and well, and he is messing around and trying to create chaos. Now, he can't do it he can't do it in a way that makes him public, but he's doing it through puppets and trying to orchestrate chaos.
And now back to Brandis and the debate over 51st State. Brandis.
In Paris, advocates are working to add a 51st star to the U.S. flag. This push for Washington, D.C. to become a state is ramping up with a bill moving through Congress, a march on the Mall, and the second ever Senate hearing to discuss the matter. Advocates say D.C. residents deserve representation in Congress, while opponents point to constitutional arguments against statehood for the nation's capital. Joining us with their respective perspectives are Zach Smith, legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, that's a conservative D.C.-based think tank, and Jamal Holtz, lead advocate of the 51 for 51 campaign to give D.C. statehood. Welcome, both of you, to Chicago Tonight, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Jamal, let's start with you, please. What is your case for giving D.C. statehood?
Yeah, I mean, the fight for D.C. statehood for me, it's personal, and it roots back to the reason why I got involved into the movement. One, the ideals of this country are founded on the principles of no taxation without representation. And as we celebrate the 4th of July weekend coming up and celebrate independence, we can't truly celebrate independence where there are American citizens who are disenfranchised, who are majority Black and brown, who do not have the right to vote. And I say it's personal for me because when I got involved into this fight in 2014, it was during a time where the Affordable Care Act was under provisions and really, giving American families, not Democrat or Republican, the American families the basic right to be able to walk into a hospital and get treatment and get health and basic health insurance. That was something that myself or my mom didn't have before. So I wanted to advocate for it. I wanted to advocate to ensure that we had preventative care covered, that we had an opportunity and a voice in the halls of the Senate to advocate for our livelihood. And at that point, I knew my advocacy ended at the mayor's office, where I pour so much money as a taxpayer into the federal government that's supposed to represent me, but in return, I get nothing. I don't even get a vote. I don't get a voice. I don't get the opportunity to advocate on the Hill for the issues that not only affect me,
you've
but
told our
Pakistan.
producer that you could not call your senator because as a D.C. resident, you do not have one. Zach, though, what is your concern with this movement? What is your case against D.C. gaining statehood?
Well, I think before we even get to the question of whether D.C. should become a state, we have to ask whether D.C. should become a state in the way that's currently being proposed. And that way is through simple legislation. And unfortunately, what I haven't heard from Jamal or from a lot of other proponents of D.C. statehood is addressing the constitutional issues with achieving a change in the status of the district in this manner through simple legislation. So even if you were to agree with Jamal and other proponents of D.C. statehood, there are very serious constitutional concerns with achieving it through simple legislation. And historically, this hasn't been a partisan issue. Both Democratic and Republican justice departments have traditionally agreed that a constitutional amendment would be needed in order to change the status of the District of Columbia.
And Jamal, to Zach's point, is it necessary by constitutional amendment?
The Constitution outlines that Congress has the powers to admit new states, and that's just plain and simple. What we see with the District of Columbia becoming a state, and we've passed with 86% of American citizens who live in the District of Columbia said we want to be a state. And per our recommendation, the Constitution says nothing about how big the District of Columbia should be. It says how small it doesn't say it doesn't say something how small it can be, but it does say something about how big it can't be. So what we're proposing as DC residents, as American citizens, is that we shrinken our federal district down to the White House and the monuments and the things that people come to Washington D.C. for the fancy attractions, and make a state, the Douglas Commonwealth, where people live and raise their families.
And Zach,
that's just plain and simple.
And Zach, obviously there's concern about the method, the route through which advocates are taking, but do you also have concerns about D.C. being a state itself?
Well, I think you would have to acknowledge that the district would be unique. It would be 17 times smaller in landmass than our next smallest state. There would currently be 19 cities that would be larger than the District of Columbia. And right now, at least with the current proposal that's on the table, there are very real questions outstanding about how the district would fund certain services, especially the court system and the prisons. Currently, the district does not pay for those services. The federal government does. And the current proposal would essentially have the federal government to pay for those services indefinitely. But I think we have to talk about the Constitution again briefly. Because to Jamal's point, yes, every other state after the original 13 colonies that's come into the Union have been admitted by simple legislation. But so what? That's constitutionally irrelevant because no other state enjoys the unique status of the district. No other state was expressly provided for in the Constitution like the District of Columbia. It's unique. And so again, if the status of the district is going to be changed, then the appropriate mechanism to accomplish that is through a constitutional amendment and not through the simple legislative process.
Look, the history of disenfranchisement is always tied to racism and subjugation. Disputes about statehood have always been about race. Segregationists didn't want to admit Hawaii and New Mexico into the Union because their population was majority people of color. And just like DC now, you got senators like Tom Cotton and other Republicans using coded dog whistles and language that says DC doesn't have real people or DC doesn't have car dealerships, which is all racist dog whistles around what this fight is truly about. It's about giving black and brown residents. It's about giving black and brown residents their right to vote. There's nothing unconstitutional about giving American citizens who pay federal taxes and giving them a vote in the Congress that's supposed to represent them.
And gentlemen, we've got about 45 seconds left, and I want to pose this question very quickly to both of you. Great deal of support in Congress from Democrats, obviously serious Republican opposition. Do either of you think that this bill creating State of Washington, Douglas Commonwealth, has legs in the Senate? Zach, to you first, please.
Well, look, I have to address Jamal's last point. I think tying opposition to D.C. statehood to racism is unfortunate. It's an attempt to impugn the motives of those. And as the Department of Justice report that examined the issue said, this isn't a racial issue. It's not a civil rights issue. It's a constitutional issue that goes to the very core of a Republican form of government. And to your question, right now, D.C. statehood in the Senate certainly faces an uphill battle. But it will be very interesting to see what happens.
Jamal, 10 seconds.
I'll just say the comments like Zach has said is what racist Republicans have always said on the Hill. And it's what we heard in the 1960s where they didn't want to give African Americans their right to vote. Right now is an opportunity to correct the stain in our democracy and give American citizens their right to vote. And that's simple through D.C. statehood and 51 votes in the Senate.
Okay. This is a debate that'll go on for a long time, or we'll see how much longer it goes on, actually. For now, my thanks to both of you, Zach Smith and Jamal Holtz, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we go back to Amanda Vinicky, who spent the day reporting in North Lawndale as a part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Amanda.
Brandis, I'm now joined by Fred Long. He is Vice President of Development for UCAN, which is based in North Lawndale. We are here in Douglas Park. Folks just over across the way are skateboarding. I see joggers, people walking their dogs. That comes as this weekend UCAN's involved with an effort to launch a recreation association. Tell us, what is this initiative and why are you doing it?
It's important for us to make sure that we provide young people, free sports and recreation, and one that is world class. Unlike that, in some of the suburbs and collar counties of Chicago where you have to pay to play, we want to make sure that we give our young people and family and residents in North Lawndale a chance to play and be recreational and happy and free of charge.
So what are we talking? Softball, soccer?
All sports, softball, football, basketball, rugby, and also girls basketball and soccer as well.
And no price for any of the youth that want to participate?
No price at all. As long as you're connected with one of our partners here in North Lawndale and you're connected to UCAN, you have access to all of the resources.
Already hearing fireworks blasting in the nearby distance. Obviously, the 4th of July has unfortunately come to be known also for something that sounds similar in gunshots. What are you doing in terms of violence prevention?
So UCAN has two models. One, street outreach, where we have, a team of about 50 of our staff who are working in communities out in the streets mitigating violence as it happens and trying to prevent violence from happening or subsequent shootings. So we're scaling up in partnership with the Chicago Police Department. There was a shooting last night on Millard on 22nd Street, and our team is already responding to that and activating similar to what first responders do.
Any hopes out of this meeting that will be held with Superintendent Brown possibly tomorrow?
Yeah. I think the real hope is that everyone understands that it's going to take a large effort. UCAN, in partnership with a lot of our community partners, the Alderman office, folks like yourself, and giving us the opportunity to talk about ways that we can mitigate what's happening in the streets of Chicago.
You've worked for UCAN for 18 years, but prior to that, you were involved otherwise.
Yes. UCAN's vision is that youth who suffer trauma can become our future leaders. And that's just not a slogan. It's not something you tag on a wall on a billboard. It's something that's real. I'm a former client in foster care. I grew up there and at UCAN, and now I'm in executive management. And we have about 20-plus alumni who work for UCAN.
And in the brief time that we have left, UCAN is known for its foster care services. How was that affected during the pandemic?
Just like everyone else, but we still had to serve young people and their families, and we became pseudo healthcare workers and teaching folks how to use PPE and be safe. So it's been, quite a change and shift in the way that we do it, but it's necessary.
Well, thank you so much for your work and best wishes this weekend with both the violence prevention and the recreation effort. And with that, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. Up next, the fascinating story of Chicago's old commuter railroad stations in an encore edition of Ask Jeffrey. But first, a look at the weather.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part through the generous support of the Julius Frankel Foundation.
Chicago's old passenger railroad stations for decades acted as the city's front door, where people from all over the country arrived seeking a better life or just the thrills of the big city. Jeffrey Bayer takes us back to the golden age of rail travel in this week's Ask Jeffrey. Hey, Jeffrey, good to see you.
Great to see you, Paris.
All right, so we have a question from Larry Gardner of Skokie. He says, could you do a story on the old train stations that once stood in downtown Chicago?
Well, of course we can. There's, as you mentioned, the late 19th century, the early 20th century. This was the golden age of rail travel when people traversed the country on trains. And of course, right at the center there, at the hub of it all, was Chicago. It's hard to believe, but as recently as the 1960s, there were 6 passenger train stations in downtown Chicago. Today, all passenger trains that come into the city from beyond the suburbs go through the last one standing, Union Station, which is now owned by Amtrak. It's Beaux-Arts design, including this now demolished concourse that was right along the river there, and the colonnaded main building, which is still standing right behind it in this picture. Those things recall the grandeur of rail terminals in those glory days, designed to wow the traveler the way many airports do today. That was certainly the goal of another neoclassically designed terminal. Check this one out, owned by the Chicago and Northwestern Railway, very neoclassical Beaux-Arts, and it stood at what is today Ogilvy Transportation Center, which is operated by Metra. That station included ornate concourses, waiting rooms, even dedicated spaces for barbers and hairdressers, you know, people traveling across the country. The Chicago and Northwestern Railway traced its roots to Chicago's very first railroad, the Galena and Chicago Union, established way back in 1848 by Chicago's first mayor, actually, William B. Ogden.
Certainly the golden age of travel there. And then another key player, of course, you hear references in pop culture all the time, the Illinois Central.
Oh, absolutely. That company billed itself as the main line of mid-America, and it was a dominant player both in passenger and freight rail. Their main passenger terminal was called Central Station, and it once stood just south of Grant Park, right on the lakefront there. The railroad built this mammoth terminal in 1893, in part to accommodate the influx of visitors that were expected for the World's Fair that year. You'll notice almost all of these terminals have clocks or clock towers, so people hurrying to catch trains didn't have to fumble around for their pocket watches. That's, of course, if they had watches at all. Central Station was also an important point of entry for many African Americans who came to Chicago from the South during the Great Migration. And like so many of its contemporaries, Central Station met the wrecking ball, in this case in the mid-1970s, after Amtrak diverted their trains to Union Station. But there is still an active platform at 11th Street serving the Metra electric line.
And I would gather it's the inspiration for that residential development around their Central Station, which I believe Richard M. Daley lived there for a while. And
You're right.
This is not to be confused with Grand Central Station, of course, right?
No, that's right. And yes, we had our own Grand Central Station here in Chicago. So not New York's wasn't the only one. Ours was at Harrison and Wells on the western edge of the Loop, right along the river for about 80 years. It was just north of, if you know where River City's development is today. Traffic declined at Grand Central after World War II. This photo with the Board of Trade there in the background was taken in 1967. At the end of the station's life, it was torn down in 1971. And this is one of several places in the city where abandoned railroad land is being redeveloped. During construction of the new development on this old site, buried stones from Grand Central Station were actually unearthed, and they've been repurposed for a river walk. One Chicago train station that actually is still standing, so in addition to Union Station, is Dearborn Station in the South Loop, although of course it's not a train station anymore. And you can see its clock tower visible all the way from the north side of the loop, looking south down on Dearborn. But what happened to the top of that clock tower? Take a look at this early photo and you'll notice it once had this huge wooden Flemish roof on top of it. But in 1922, it caught fire. Look at these incredible photos from the scene as crowds gathered, and luckily firefighters were able to save the building, but not that tower roof. In the 1970s, most of the train shed was demolished, but the facade and portions of the terminal were preserved as part of a mall serving Printers Row. The building is still called Dearborn Station, and in fact, Paris, as you just pointed out, many old stations live on in the names of new developments. The one you mentioned, Central Station, just south of Grant Park, where Mayor Daley used to live, and then a new apartment building at Harrison and Wells is using the Grand Central name.
The ghosts of Chicago's rail pass still around. All right, Jeffrey Bayer, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And don't forget, you can visit our website for more details about Chicago's old passenger rail stations. And while you're there, don't forget to submit your own question to Jeffrey Bayer. And that's all at WTTW.com/AskJeffrey. Back with more right after this. Illinois is known, of course, for growing corn and soybeans, but there's another local crop some say is ready for its close-up: honey. Chicago Tonight's Quinn Myers recently brought us the story of a bee farm just north of Chicago that has become one of the most celebrated in the entire state. Here's another look.
This is just, what, 1-to-1 sugar?
Yeah.
Sugar and water. And we're feeding them because there is no nectar being produced, very little right now.
Yeah.
Certainly not enough to make honey. And what we're trying to do right now is build these colonies up.
Karen and Jim Belly never expected to become beekeepers. A retired CPS teacher and an architect, they both grew up in Chicago, far away from any sort of agriculture, let alone an apiary. But in the early 1990s, after they bought farmland in Old Mill Creek, Illinois, near the Wisconsin border, the previous owner, who still lived on the property, had an idea.
And she said, why don't you try beekeeping? She said, all the farms years ago all had a couple of hives up here.
A few years later, after they befriended a beekeeper nearby and attended a few workshops, the Bellies decided to give it a shot.
We said we're going down to Hamilton, Illinois to buy equipment, and we're going to give it a try. So
Karen actually looked at me and said, if we don't get into this soon, we're going to be too old to do it.
The Bellies began with 2 hives and slowly expanded. They started entering their honey in local competitions, then the state fair, then national contests, and today have racked up dozens and dozens of awards. And just last year, the couple were named the 2020 Beekeepers of the Year by the Illinois State Beekeepers Association.
It still is a technical hobby, but it's kind of more than that, though, right?
It's a passion now.
But it's now a passion, yeah, I would say that.
The Bellies say their secret is the diversity of local plants and trees, making Northeast Illinois one of the best places to raise honeybees in the entire country.
You could not do this if you didn't have what we have here. And if you would have told me this before we got into beekeeping, that northeastern Illinois was this magical place for honey, I would have said, you've got to be kidding.
Every year, the Bellies bees feast on lindens, black locusts, clover, wildflowers, fruit trees, and more, creating shades of honey that range from almost translucent to dark brown, colors the couple say would be hard to find anywhere else.
The color is determined by the nectar source, and so you have to have a huge variety of different plants and trees and shrubs and perennials to get the different nectar sources, which will give you the different colors. Here we have a very long growing season, actually, and we have a huge amount of variety.
The Bellies maintain around 40 hives at their summer peak, yielding around 1,000 pounds of honey every year. They do it all on their property, also home to an expansive barn they refurbished and a custom farmhouse Jim designed himself. But while their operation and prestige has grown quite a bit since they bought their first hives, The Bellies say what keeps them going is working with the bees themselves, what they call bee time.
See, that wasn't so bad now, was it? There's no clock, there's no day. It's just you and the bees. And you have a bond with them. And you're watching them, and you're watching them come in and out of the hive, and you're looking at the frames, and you're seeing them move around. And you're trying to be, as you found out, as calm and as peaceful as you can. And they're just so busy doing their job, and it's absolutely no sense of time. There's nothing. It's just you and the bees.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Quinn Myers.
Very sweet business there, and you can learn more about the belly bees on our website. And that is our show for this Thursday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night at 7 for the Week in Review. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm named on the 2021 expertise list of the best personal injury attorneys in Chicago.